Tired of quilt blocks that just don't click? These 5 classics are like the little black dress of quilting. Simple, stylish, and they always work. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is cut out our fabric. And I've already cut out the 5 colored blocks that I'm going to use. And so now I just need to cut out my background fabric. And just to let you know, we're cutting these down into 4.5-inch squares. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but these are some tone on tone whites. This one has some little rosebuds. This one has a leaf pattern. And then we have just a plain white. I think for this one, I believe it would go really well with this rosebud, but I'm going to use just the basic white today. And so I'm going to show you how to cut that out. This is just a piece of yardage that I have. And just a side note to let you know that if all you have is 5-inch squares, like charm packs, you can cut those down to 4.5 inches. Or you could just use them as 5 inches. But I'm making a 12.5-inch block that when I sew it to my other blocks, the finished size will be 12 inches. So that's why I'm using 4.5 inches for my blocks. And then I'm going to find my 4.5-inch mark. Set this piece aside. And I'm going to go ahead and leave mine folded. This way I can get, 2 out of at once instead of cutting them in a single. I'm going to cut this end off to straighten the edge. So that gives us 4.5-inch blocks. Okay. Okay. So the next step, since I have my background blocks cut out, and I'll take these blocks and I'll just start to line them up in 3s. Okay, I'm going to put this dark one right in the middle. And I'm going to put my stripe one, since this one's sort of striped just like this one, I'll put those in opposite corners. And this fabric has the rose on it. And I got this one with the butterflies. So it's the same fabric, these two, but they look different because this one has the butterflies and this one just the rose. I'll put my other one right here. And this will give us our basic 9-patch block. So I'll just go to the machine and I'll sew these 3 together in one row, then these and these, and then put all the rows together. And you're still using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I've sewed each of our rows, and now we can start sewing them together. I'm just going to pull the middle one over the top, and then going to match up seams, making sure that you are going in the opposite direction with your 2 dark fabrics. I'm making sure that I turn this darker fabric in towards the middle. Okay. And so I'll sew those together, and then when we get back, and then I'll sew these two to our middle. Okay, so our block is finished. Now all we need to do is iron it. And the way I iron it is I'm just going with the way these seams are like laying, so they're just in one direction. And then in the middle here, they lay towards the middle block. So, and then these two rows, you can either lay them in opposite directions like this or towards the middle. I prefer the opposite. I think it lays a little bit more flat, and they tend to go in that direction. So just going to do it like that. Okay, and then I'll just turn it over and then iron it again this way. Okay, so then our finished block should measure out to about 12.5. Okay, so to make our Churn Dash block, you're going to need just a few fabrics. I have this creamy white for a background. I'm going to use this for my half square triangles and my bar blocks. And I want to use this particular one for the center. Now you can use the background fabric for the center. And I mean, that would just be the simpler option. But I'm going to go ahead and put this in the center. I want to fussy cut the butterfly out of this fabric for my center. Okay, so once you have established the fabrics you want to use, you want to iron them and then cut them. Now you're going to cut 1 4-inch block for your center. You're going to cut 4 4-inch blocks for your half square triangles and your bar blocks. And you're going to cut 4 background fabrics. Now, like I said, you can use just the background fabric for the center if you want, or you can use any other color in the center. You can also use like a 4-patch if you want to do that. But I'm just going to use this one. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you want to take one of your background blocks and you're going to pair it right sides together with one of your other blocks. Okay, and then you'll take a pencil or any kind of marking tool, and you're going to draw a line from corner to corner with your pencil. You just want it to be dark enough so that you can see, because you're going to go take this to the machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam away from this center line. You're going to sew it on each side of the center line. So we'll do that, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so now that we have sewn our half square triangles, we're just going to take our ruler, and then you want to cut this on that center line that you drew. You sewed on each side, so now you cut on the center line. Okay, and that gives you 2 half square triangles. Okay, and you do the same thing to the other one. Okay, and now you can take this to the iron and set your seams and iron them. Just gonna grab my ironing mat, my iron. Spread them out. That way we can set the seams really quickly. Okay, and then you'll just take them and open them up. Just finger press it open gently. That way you're not stretching it out too much. And then use your iron to iron them flat. And we'll do that to all 4 of them. So now that we've ironed them, bring them to the mat And we want to square them up at 3.5 inches. Now you can see some of them are just a little off, and that's why we want to square them up. And if you have a smaller rectangle square, you can use that to square them. I'm just going to take my ruler and then just cut off that little excess when you get to, I got it on the 3.5 inches here. And then you'll just rotate it. And make sure that you are counting. See, I'm counting 1, 2, 3.5. It's easier if you have a square. I don't have that with me right now. And then you'll just rotate it again. Got it right here. Just need to cut off this little tail. Okay. And so you'll do that to all of your squares so that they're 3.5 inches in diameter. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do is our bar blocks. Okay, so once you have your half square triangles made, you're going to take another one of your squares and put it face down with your white background. Okay, and then you're going to take this to the machine and you're going to sew a quarter of an inch seam on the right side of your block, and then again on the left side of your block. And that way when you cut them, you're going to cut them right in the middle. You'll have 2 of your bar blocks out of this one. And you're going to do that twice because you need 4 of these, just like you needed 4 of the half square triangles. Okay? Okay, so now that we have sewn our bar blocks on each side, a quarter of an inch seam, we're going to cut these in half. So I'll just put it on the 4-inch mark here. So your half mark will be 2 inches. Okay, and then when you open them, you got your bar. Okay, so next you're just going to go and cut your other one in half as well, and then we're going to iron these, and then we'll come back and put them all together. Okay, so now we have them all cut out, ironed, and squared up. We're going to start by putting our half square triangles in each of the corners. Okay, and then you'll go and you'll put your bar blocks. Now in your bar blocks, I wanted to show you, you're going to have, it's going to be 4 inches one way and then 3.5 the other way. You don't have to square these up. You want to leave them like they are. Okay, so we're going to place them right in between our half square triangles. Okay. Okay, and then we'll put our center right in the center with our butterflies. Okay, so now you can see what our finished block will look like. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go row by row. I'm going to sew this row, then this one together. and then we'll sew all the rows together. So you're just going to put them right sides together and sew that 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so now we have sewn our pieces into 3 rows like this. We're going to take our middle row and we're going to fold it over the top row, and then we're going to match our seams up together. You want to make sure that your seams are going to the darker fabric so that they're opposite, and you just want to lay them side by side, making sure that they're right next to each other so there's no gap in between them. And then you can go and put a clip in it, or you can use a pin if you prefer. Just going to use a clip. Okay, and then I'm going to sew this row together, and then I'll take the bottom and sew this one up. Okay, so here is our finished block. Sewed our rows together, and then I ironed it flat, and it measures out to approximately 10 inches. Okay, so to make a Dresden block, you're going to need a variety of fabrics that coordinate. And I've got this back quarter bundle from Walmart. And you'll need a Dresden ruler, a turner, but you can use a pencil if you don't have a turner, something with a point. Okay, and some pins or some clips, and some background fabric to make our square for our Dresden plate to sit on. And I'm going to use this pink, I think, for my circle in the middle. And for the circle, you'll need something round. I'm going to use this piece of foam because it's about 5 inches in diameter, which should be the right size for the circle I want to make. Okay, so to get started, just choose one of our fabrics, and you can use some scraps for this. Scraps would be like wonderful. I mean, it's a great way to use up any scraps that you have. Okay, so to start cutting out our Dresden plate blades, I'm going to cut off this end where my selvage is. Okay, now I'm going to cut a 4-inch strip, since we want to make our blades 4 inches long. So we're going to measure it from the 4-inch mark here, and I'm going to cut my strip at 4 inches. Okay, and then we'll set the rest of this aside. Okay, so then we'll take our ruler, and we're going to make sure our 4-inch line is at the top, and starting on this end, or whichever end you're more comfortable with if you're left-handed or right-handed. Let's cut that sliver off. And okay, so that gives us 2 blades. Set those aside, and then I'll just turn my ruler on the other side, line it up with my 4-inch line here at the bottom, and then hold our ruler down and cut on this side. And then you have 2 more, and you're just going to continue doing the same thing, turning it over, lining up your line it back up at the top, and then cutting your wedge. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is cut all the different variety strips that you need in the different colors, and do the same thing. You're going to cut your blades out of it. And for this particular Dresden plate, you need 20 blades. Okay? And then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so the next thing that I do, since I already ironed them, I got some of the wrinkles out from them being folded. Okay, so next I'm going to arrange them into the circle that I want to. And you want to put, I do like lights and darks and separate them so that you get a variety of color. You're going to take one of your blades and you're going to fold it longwise or lengthwise together, like so. And you're just going to take it to your sewing machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam right across the top. And you can stick a pin if you want or a clip. So I'll do that to these ends and then I'll show you what to do next. Also, here's another good tip. Whenever you're sewing these, you can chain sew them so it goes a lot faster. You just fold them all, like clipping them. And then when you put them through your machine, I like to go with the folded end. That way the loose end doesn't get caught underneath your needle and get sucked into your machine. So I'll start with the folded edge and sew 1/4 of an inch seam, and then I'll just keep going, sticking all these underneath there, and it'll form a big chain. And then you just go in and snip in between them to cut them apart. Okay, for another quick tip I wanted to show you, when you fold over your blade and you're going to sew your 1/4 inch seam, use a 1.8 or a 2.0 stitch length. And that way you'll get smaller stitches and it'll keep this from coming apart because you're going to turn it out and it'll hold a lot better. So just wanted to let you know that. And now I'm going to go ahead and stitch all of them together and then I'll come back and show you how to turn them out. Okay, so I have chain stitched together right here. And now I'm just going to snip them apart with my scissors. Just want to be careful not to snip into your, some of them are a little close. So. And then once you have them all apart, you can start to turn them out. And the first thing that I do is I snip a corner. Let's see if I can show you that closer. Right at the corner right here, about 1/8 of an inch away from your stitch line. And I just cut it at a slant. And you can also snip a little bit here if you want. And then I'll take my turner and what I like to do is I'll take it and press open this seam. Smash it. Okay, and then you'll just turn it out and you can take your pointer and then go right up into that point so you can get your point. Okay, and then I'll go with my iron and flatten that down really well. Okay, and you're going to do that to all of your blades, and then you'll start to sew them together. So you just put them right sides together, and you can put a pin in here or a clip, lining your sides up. I use the same stitch length, the small stitch length, to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam right down the side. And you're going to do that to all of your blades. But the way that I do it, I put like 10 of them together. You'll do half of them together, and then you'll do the other half together. and then sew both your halves together. So that way it's less bulk and you won't stretch it out too much, and it's, they'll come out a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to go do that right now. Okay, so I've sewed all the blades together, and it makes a perfect circle. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to iron it, and I'm going to try to iron my blades with the seams open. Since we used a smaller stitch to sew them together, sewing them open will help to, it'll keep it intact, and it'll make it more flat so that when you go to lay it out, you have a flatter look to it. So I'm just going to go to each one, open them up in a small little press, and then once I have them all opened and pressed a little, I'll go back and press the whole thing again just to make sure that it's flat, and I'll press it on the other side as well. Okay, so I've ironed all my seams open, and if you're a beginner, as a general rule, you would iron your seams to the darker fabric, and that is true. But in this case, where it's a Dresden plate, you're layering your Dresden over another piece of fabric, so you're going to have some bulkiness, and it's always better to have the least, the amount of bulkiness in your block as possible. So I iron them open, and now I'll turn it over, and I will iron it a little bit more on the front this way just to get it all nice and flat. Okay, and this is our Dresden plate. Now we're going to cut our fabric that we will put the Dresden plate on, and then we'll do our circle for the middle. Okay, to cut our background fabric out, I'm going to cut it at 12.5 inches square. You can see that our plate is just a tad bit over the 11 inches mark on the bottom and the sides. So you want a little bit of room in your finished block around your Dresden plate. So I'm going to cut it at 12.5 inches, and that way extra half inch will account for the seam allowances, and you'll have a finished block of 12 inches. Okay, so we'll move on to cutting our background fabric out. It's going to take my piece of yardage that I had already cut out. Okay, and I'm going to go over to 12.5 inches. Okay. Okay, so I've got 12 inches that way, and I'll just turn it, open it up, and then see, straighten out this edge, and then again go over 12.5 inches. Okay, so I'm going to iron this really quick. Okay, and then you'll just take your Dresden plate, and you're going to want to center it. So the way I do it is I'm just going to fold it in half, meet up with these points. And that way you'll get your halfway mark. Set that aside for a minute. I'm going to do the same thing to my background square. Just want to fold it in half. Just a little crease right here. And then I'll take it and fold it in half again. and crease it. I do it right here in the middle too, just so that I know that my center is right there. And then I open it up, and then we can place our Dresden right on those center marks. If it's just a tad bit off, I mean, that's okay. You just want to make sure that you're getting the same distance around the top and the bottom and the sides. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use my glue stick, to tack this down instead of using pins. So you just want to go, and you don't have to put a lot. Just put like a little dab, on each one, and it doesn't take long for it to dry. It's going in like this, and it's washable, so it's not going to stay on here. Once you wash your project, the glue is going to come right out. Okay, and you just give it a minute to let it dry. And then I'm going to bring it to the machine, and I'm going to sew around each of the points, these edges, all the way around. And you can use any stitch. You can use a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, satin stitch, or a blanket stitch. I prefer the blanket stitch. I like the way it looks. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to sew a blanket stitch all the way around. Okay, so I sewed the blanket stitch all the way around my points, as you can see here. And next, we're going to make our circle and put that over our Dresden plate. So set that aside. Okay, for the circle that we're going to put in the center of our Dresden plate, I've cut out the 5-inch diameter circle, and then I have a piece of SF101. Now, I really like this because, I mean, you can use another piece of fabric if you want. I like to use the SF101 because it's nice and thin. It's not going to be really bulky, and it has that glue side. So what I do is I'm putting my fabric face down with the glue side. I'm going to cut it out, or you can wait and cut it out after you sew it. So I'm going to sew it at 3/8 of an inch, so that when I turn it out, it's going to be just the right size, and it won't be too big in the middle. When we're done, we're going to cut a slit in the back here, and we're going to turn it. And then when you turn it, you'll have the bumpy side on one side, and then your right side on the other side. And then you can iron this in the middle of your Dresden plate. And that way it'll stay for you to go and then do your blanket stitch or straight stitch, decorative stitch around your circle. Okay, so I sewed a 3/8 inch seam all the way around. Now we're going to cut it out. I'm going to go ahead and trim some of this off and get it down to about a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch all the way around. It's going to make it easier to turn out if we do it like this. You can also make a few little slits in it along the way. Just don't cut into your seams. Okay, so how we're going to turn this out is I'm going to take the layers and pull them apart. Okay, so you separate the layers like so, and then be careful. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut a slit about a 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch just to get it open, and then now I'll cut it and make it a little bit larger. And you can go at a cross ways like this, and then we'll turn it out. You can use your turning tool to straighten it up as well. I'm just going to use my finger. So then you'll take your block and you'll center it onto your Dresden. Make sure you cover up all the opening. And if you want, you can use a ruler. Just kind of go around and make sure you have it at the same distance away. Okay, and now we can iron it on here. That sticky bumpy side is on the bottom, and now if we iron it, it's going to stay right there and it won't move when we go to sew or stitch around it. Okay, so our Dresden block is done. I sewed a blanket stitch all the way around the center. I sewed a lighter pink color thread around the center, since the center is like a really pale pink, and a darker pink around the points. So today we're going to make a pinwheel block. And pinwheel blocks are very simple, and it's basically the most simplest way is by making half square triangles. So we're going to do that again. And if you followed me in the Churn Dash, if you saw that video, I showed you how to make a half square triangle in that video. But today we're going to use a different size. We're going to use 5.5-inch squares. So I've got a dark fabric, a background fabric, and this is an accent fabric. I'm going to show you the half square triangle in two different ways. Okay, so first we'll make our dark maroon or cranberry. Again, this is from the cranberry line of fat quarters from Walmart. If you're interested in this fabric, I'm using the same fabric because I want to put all of these traditional blocks that I'm showing you how to make into one blanket. And I'll show you how to do that once we've got all the different blocks made. Okay, I'm going to set two of these aside for our other block. And we start by taking our background block, layering it right sides together with our darker colored block. I'm going to make sure that's all lined up straight. Just a little off right here. My background fabric got crumpled. Okay, so next thing you're going to do is draw our line down the middle. And I'll just take my ruler along with a marking pencil or plain. This is just a plain mechanical pencil. You're not going to see the line when you're quilting this, so it won't show up in your block. Okay, so you're just going to line up your ruler diagonally from corner to corner, and then take your mechanical pencil and just draw a line. And I'm doing it light. I just need it to be dark enough to where I can see when I'm sewing. Okay, I don't know if you can see that well. Very good on the camera. And I'm just going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on each side of the center line. Okay, and we'll do that to both of these, both of our colors, and then come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, so now that we've sewn our seams on either side of the center line, I'm going to cut them in half. You can use your rotary cutter to cut them in half, or you can use a pair of scissors. And I'm just going to use the scissors. I'm cutting on that center line that we drew, and then that will give us our half square triangle. Okay, and then I'll just finger press it to the darker fabric. And now we're going to want to square these up. And I'm going to square them to 5 inches. Now that's why I cut my squares into 5.5, so I'd have that extra 1/2 inch in order to square these to 5 inches. Now, if all you have is 5-inch charm squares, that'll work too, but you're just going to square it down to 4.5 inches instead of 5. Okay, so I'm going to cut the rest of these up, and then I'm going to iron them and square them. Okay, so to square these up, you can use a square ruler, you know, that has a 45-degree line to square them. I'm just going to use my tall ruler, and I have that 45-degree line on here. And so I just place it like where it would, within that 5-inch square radius. And then take my ruler and put this 45-degree line in between both of these on that seam. And then I'll bring it over, and then I'll cut off that little bit that's excess. Okay, and then I just rotate it once, lining it up again on that 5-inch mark, and then using this 45-degree angle mark, and then cut off that excess. And you're going to do the same thing, just going around until you get to all 4 sides. And sometimes it will only just be like a tiny little sliver or these little dog ears, but that's fine. You just want to make sure that you're getting all the little excess off of it. Okay, so you'll do that to all 4 of your 5-inch, all 4 of your half square triangles. Okay. So now that we have them all ironed and squared up, we're going to turn our blocks in the direction that we need them to be in for our pinwheel. That, and then this. This way. Okay, so now what you'll do is you'll sew these two together, right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. You'll do the same thing for the bottom 2, and then you'll take them and turn them over on top of the top row and sew them together. And so for the rows, when you're sewing each of them this way, you want to make sure that this one is opposite of this one, and you want to butt it up right next to it. And you can see, make sure that they don't overlap. They just want to sit right next to each other. And then you'll take your clip or a pin and pin those together, or clip them. Okay, and then you'll sew that 1/4 inch seam right down, and you'll do the same thing to this one, making sure that they're opposite of each other on that corner where they meet up, and pin them together. And I just want to make sure that I have this pointed in the right direction. Okay, yes I do. So you're going to sew it down this way, and then on this side right here. I'll meet you back here to sew them together. Okay, so now you see we have both parts, and we're just going to turn this one over on top of this one. And you want to match up your seams going in opposite directions, snuggling them up right next to each other. And then put a pin or a clip in it, and then sew across a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so with our other pair, we're going to do the same thing and cut them down that middle line. Okay, and then we'll iron these and square these up as well. We'll square these at 5 inches. Okay, on this one, I just wanted to show you how you can do the opposite with your background fabric. by placing it as the dominant, you know, to have that pinwheel look. And you still get your pinwheel, but it's just opposite, and that you get like a, you know, different look to it. You can even turn them and just do this the way that you did the other one if you prefer. And you get another look. So you can place them either way that you want to get a different look. So I'm going to sew this one up like I did the other one, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so we've finished our blocks. This is the one with the accent fabric, and then the plain block with just the background fabrics. And I want to show you that I've ironed them, and when I ironed it, I ironed this middle row open because you're going to have like a really bulky seam right here where all the seams meet in the middle. And so it's going to be a little bit bulky. So I opened it and ironed it this way in order to flatten it as much as possible. Okay. Now that you know how to make the pinwheel block, you can pair them with any other blocks and make a nice quilt with it. Okay, so to make this block, you're going to need a variety of fabrics and some background fabric, and you can use a plain white, cream white, or something like this, like a white on white tone fabric, or any low volume background. And we will be using some of these as background too, but we'll get into that. I'm going to show you a couple different variations on the Friendship Star. So for the first block we're going to make, you're going to need 4.5-inch blocks of your background fabric, and you'll need 4 of those. You'll need 2 5-inch squares of your colored block or floral block, and you'll need 2 5-inch of your background squares. Okay, so I'll put this aside and I'll show you after you have cut them out. We'll take our 4 4.5-inch background squares and we'll put them aside. And then you will need to grab your 2 5-inch background squares and the 2 5-inch main squares. So how we're going to do this is we're going to make half square triangles, and you'll just want to put your background square face down, right sides together with your other block, with your other square of fabric. So you need 2 of those, and then we're going to just take our ruler and a pencil or a marking tool, and then you're just going to draw a line from corner to corner diagonally. And you'll do that for both squares. So then you'll take your squares to the machine and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam away from the center line that you drew. And you're going to do that on both sides of the line. Okay, so I'll do that. I have sewn our squares on either side of the center line, and now I'm going to cut them. And to cut them, you can use a rotary cutter or you can just use your scissors. You're just going to cut on that line that you drew. And this will give you 4 half square triangles. Okay, so now I'm going to iron our triangles. Start by setting the seams, and then you want to turn your seam to the darker fabric. And I'm using this really pretty spring fabric because in my next video I'm going to put all these friendship blocks together to make a table runner. And I believe I got this fabric on Amazon, and it was a fat quarter bundle, and I'll see if I can find that to list it in the description below. Now I didn't starch my fat quarter bundle before I cut it. So if you prefer to do that, you can do that. And now we're going to square up our half square triangles to 5.5 inches. Now I've got this 5.5 inch square, and all I do is I stick the square on top on that 45-degree line right there in between the two colors, so that when you do that, all you need to do is cut off the excess from there. Just turn it around the other direction and line it up again, and then cut sides again. Okay, and now we have our 4.5 inch square. So you'll do that to each of these, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so now we have squared up all of our half square triangles. We can start to lay out our block. You're going to start with one of your half square triangles here, and then you'll put one of your 4.5 inch background triangles next to it. I mean, plain blocks, background blocks. You'll do the same on both sides. And then for the next row, turn your half square triangle in this direction. And then you'll put your solid 4.5 inch square in the middle. And then set this triangle in this direction. And this one going in this direction. You can see now you have your star. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to sew all these together. You'll just sew each one of these in each row together, and then sew each of your rows together, all with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when you sew your rows together, you'll have seams that you'll have to line up and nest, but I'll show you how to do that when we get to that. Okay, so I've sewed my pieces in each of the 3 rows, and now we're going to put our rows together. You just want to turn over that top one and then start to nest your seams. And you're just putting them right next to each other, and you make sure you don't overlap them and that there's no space in between them. And I always check in between just to make sure. And then you can stick a pin or a clip, and you go to the other side and do the same thing. And then I'm putting the darker fabric towards the middle, in that middle row, so that they're opposite. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing to the bottom. Okay, and here's our first finished block. So I'm going to set this one aside and show you the next variation. Okay, so for our next variation, I went ahead and I've already made my half square triangles and squared them up. And this one, yeah, I'm using the background with the rosebuds on it. So it's a 2-tone background. So for this one, I'm going to lay them out. But this time, I'm going to put them in the opposite direction. I'll show you what I mean. Going to lay them out where the middle star is going to be the background fabric. For the background itself, I'm going to use the same fabric here. Okay, now I'll go to the next row. Okay, so then I'll lay out my next one, and in the middle will be the same rosebud. This one. And this one. So now we have the same star shape, but using the background as the star instead. Okay, so I wanted to show you another variation with the same fabric where you'll just do the same thing that you did before, but you're going to turn your star in the opposite direction. So you start off with going and just turning them around from the way they were. And so now it turns in the opposite direction as this other star. You can see this one is going in this direction, and then this one in the other direction. So you can do it either way that you prefer. And then we have one more I want to show you. And you'll sew this one just like you did the other one. You're going to sew them in rows and then sew each row together. Okay, and so for the next one I wanted to show you is I'm going to use this same triangle with the solid white on this one, but I'm putting my background blocks in pink. So you'll just lay them out like you did before. And you can turn your star into any directions that you want. Okay, and then we'll lay out our last row. Okay, and so then I'll go to the machine and I'll sew it all up just the way I did the other ones. And then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so here's all of our blocks completed. I've ironed them. I'll just show you each one of them. And this is probably exactly how I will put them together in my runner, with this one in the middle going in the opposite direction of the two on the end. Okay. But that's it. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below and let me know what you think. We'll see you back here soon. Goodbye for now.